Can I have some gruel, please?
Okay, so now today we're in the Prancing Pony.
Here's photo with his cleft chin.
Yeah, it does have a little bit of a cleft chin, like we were just talking about last week. And I think Peter Jackson cast this movie very well because he found someone with a bit of a cleft chin.
Right, right.
The first thing I realized, or the first thing the impression I got, was that we're in this place where there's a lot of activity in the Prancing Pony, and you haven't really had that in Fellowship since Bilbo's birthday party. So for several chapters, it's just been the few hobbits scurrying eastward. They occasionally meet like one or a few people: Goldberry, Tom, Gildor, etc.
A fox,
Fatty Bulger, a fox.
Fatty.
So they just encounter a few people, but now they're back into
Black
to civilization. What's that?
Black Riders.
Black Riders.
They've
but
met
now you
quite
feel
a few
like they're
people.
actually in
Barrow Whites.
Barrow White. They see some whites.
They saw some whites, some Barrow Whites.
Yeah, or as the French pronounce it, wiggets.
Wiggets.
They see some Barrow wiggets.
Wiggets. Okay.
But now, because they're in this new place and you see lots of people, it just seems to open up all these possibilities, because not only do you have like more hobbits, but you also have men. And you get that sense of like, okay, there's a new place. There's tons of things going on. Who do you trust?
What it boils down to, I think, and actually, I think Peter Jackson did do a good job of illustrating this with his choice of camera angles, is that there's a vulnerability that these hobbits have, that hasn't been there,
like that angle in particular where they look so small,
like they look small and vulnerable and exposed, really.
Yeah. And I'm almost thinking like this angle is like the way he's looking down on them so far. It's really, like foreshortened, or I don't know what the word is. Like it just seems it's forced perspective, but it's like he's really, like when you're looking up at a camera or down at a camera, it really gives that sense of like this person's dominating over me. So it's like this camera's like really looking straight up at Butterbird's face. And you got this sense that, like the hobbits are small, so they feel maybe vulnerable. They feel slightly out of their element. Not only are these strangers, but they're large strangers. And
I always like Bob and Nob, because I felt like, okay, here's some little hobbit pals. So now I felt good that they felt comfortable, a little bit. You know what I'm talking about?
They felt more comfortable than they otherwise would have, because there is a hobbit contingent.
Yes, and you had all the hobbits that were welcoming to him, and with Underhill, there being several Underhills in Bree, they're like,
well, that's the other thing. Related. I mean, like I said, this book has kind of been a slow boil, but for me, this chapter felt like a little dicier than the other chapters. Like, oh shoot, there's this paradox or this mixed blessing of other hobbits knowing your name, which on the one hand makes you feel welcome, but on the other hand just adds to the danger of exposing you as a fraud. Yeah.
It was very I mean, I was like, how long can I keep up the charade? And I remember the whole time thinking when I was reading, it's like, why didn't they just stay back with Mary at the in the room? Right.
What I'm saying? Well, they later say that, like, if I had known, maybe we should have just like stayed in the room and just.
But they had to meet Strider somehow.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing about speaking of Strider. Strider was the subject of a lot of indecision on Tolkien's part at first, especially. Like he used to be a hobbit.
Yeah, I knew that.
He was a hobbit, and then he was supposed to be an elf dressed as a hobbit. Did you know he was supposed to be an elf dressed as a hobbit?
I didn't know he was supposed to be
an elf sent by Elrond to meet them. And in order to win their trust, he dressed himself as a hobbit or something like that.
Yeah, I'm glad he didn't stick with that one. That makes
he didn't
sense.
stick with that one. It would have been terrible. In fact,
what?
So let me.
Who said Tolkien doesn't have any bad ideas?
No, Tolkien had a ton of bad ideas, but the good thing about Tolkien and what makes him a great writer is that he discards his bad ideas.
Hey, real quick though, the thing is, like when like I read that Strider was a hobbit, right, or was originally going to be a hobbit. The name makes way more sense. You know what I'm talking about?
What do you mean?
Like it's not a far reach for me, or like I can imagine the rugged hobbit, right, calling himself Strider. Like Strider, like it just makes sense. You know what I'm talking about? Because it's not a very, like, I'm glad that they kind of use it as an insult in a way for.
Yeah, it's like what he's known colloquially. Like, it's his nickname.
Yeah, because but I can see like a hobbit being called Strider. I don't know if that makes sense, but because I always thought
but
that
to me, if it was a hobbit named Strider, it would have to be a hobbit with long legs.
You know what I mean? I guess to
Strider
me it sounds
is a long-legged name.
Yeah, only because you identify it with Aragorn. You know what I'm talking about?
But does Aragorn have long legs? I mean, he's just
they call him Longshanks. Like who calls him Longshanks?
Okay. Is he ever described as particularly? Well, I guess he's a man of the West.
Yeah,
so
he's
he
tall.
Would be tall.
Yeah, he's a man of the West. Yeah, he's tall. He's taller than Legolas, or he should have been. You know, and Legolas was like a tall elf. No, but what I'm saying is that like Strider is such kind of a dumb name. You know what I'm talking about? I mean, like for lack of a better term, that I can see a hobbit like, oh, there's Strider. He's like, you know, like that.
He walks the earth.
Yeah.
It's funny how here Frodo is in disguise or going under a pseudonym as Mr. Underhill. Right. But Strider is also in disguise. Like, he doesn't reveal, certainly not yet. You know, he doesn't reveal who he is. No one knows who he is. He's just a weirdo in the corner. I'm going to read from a scholarly work on the issue of Strider, who, when he was a hobbit, was actually called Trotter.
Trotter?
Did you know this?
I think that sounds familiar, but
yeah. So in the Return of the Shadow, Christopher Tolkien's Return of the Shadow, it's earlier versions of Lord of the Rings. Our resident Tolkien scholar says Tolkien appears to entertain the idea of Trotter not being a hobbit. First, he was a hobbit. Yeah. This was not yet enough to change his mind about his hobbit ranger. So he was, even when he was a hobbit, he was kind of conflicted about whether or not he was a hobbit. After continuing contemplating this difficult figure, Tolkien, after a break, came back with the explanation that Trotter was to be Peregrin Boffin, a favorite nephew of Bilbo, who, influenced by Gandalf or by Bilbo's stories, had run away from the Shire years before.
Wow.
Can you believe that? However, in the middle of... Go ahead.
So, was he ever called Strider, or was it always Trotter?
Well, in this early version, it was a hobbit. Oh, you mean was the hobbit called Strider ever? Well,
because it seems to me like it was.
To me, I don't think it matters in the sense that, because we're all talking about the same person, whether we're talking about a hobbit or a man, or whether their name is Trotter or Strider. This is the person that meets them in Bree,
right,
and takes them to Rivendell. Okay, regardless of the name and regardless of the race, it's just like this person fills a role. So obviously, this person started as a hobbit named Trotter. Somewhere along the line, morphed into a human ranger called Strider. I don't know how those names and races kind of overlapped, and at what point they both got replaced.
But then again, though, like you said, now it makes sense. Trotter being a hobbit trots for long, and Strider being a tall man would. Oh
yeah, maybe when he started seeing him as a man, he's like, oh, maybe he needs to stride.
A hobbit would trot.
Well, he couldn't very well have been named Waddler.
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 I like it's Peter Jackson.
It's like, my name is Waddler.
Yeah, I know.
Follow me. I'm gonna waddle. So let me just real quick, just since we're here, I want to read the section from the Return of the Shadow.
Okay.
Where Bingo, who is Frodo, first meets Trotter, who is Strider. Okay. It's funny how, despite those drastic changes of Bingo and Trotter turning into Frodo and Strider, a lot of this dialogue is the same as what ended up being in the final book.
Right.
So
that's weird.
Check this out. Tell me this is familiar. Okay. Suddenly, Bingo noticed that a queer-looking brown-faced hobbit sitting in the shadows behind the others was also listening intently. He had an enormous mug, more like a jug, in front of him, and was smoking a brown-stemmed pipe right under his rather long nose. He was dressed in dark, rough brown cloth and had a hood on. See, the hood's still there, despite the warmth. And very remarkably, he had wooden shoes. Wooden shoes. Can you believe it? Bingo could see them sticking out under the table in front of him.
Oh,
who is that over there? Said Bingo when he got a chance to whisper to Mr. Butterbur. I don't think you introduced him. What his right name is, I never heard, but around here he's known as Trotter. You can hear him coming along the road with those shoes, clitter clap. Can you believe that shit? Coming along the road in those shoes, clitter clap, when he walks on a path which isn't often. Why does he wear them? Well, I can't say. There's no accounting for east or west. That makes it to the book, as we say here, meaning the Rangers and the Shire folk begging your pardon. Can you believe that? That's crazy. Wooden shoes.
That is funny though. Like, here comes Trotter trotting down. Can you imagine? Okay, hold on. Okay, so let's just say in a world Trotter becomes like the favorite character, and instead of like the Ballad of Bilbo Baggins, Leonard Nimoy writes the Ballad of Trotter, like trotting down the road, clip, clip, clap, clap,
clippity clap. No, but can you imagine this guy right here? He's like looking all badass. Right, he's looking real metal. And then he gets somebody has these Dutch wooden shoes
on.
It's like clappity clappity clap. He does like a clogging dance.
You know what though? I think what Tolkien was probably trying to do with that, he was probably trying to separate him from the whole Hobbit, the whole kind of normal Hobbit behavior. Like, oh, he's wearing shoes and they're wooden at that. That's crazy. He must have carved them himself.
Yeah, maybe he had that intention that what would someone who was in touch with nature, what would he wear? Oh, he'd wear wooden shoes. But actually, it doesn't make any sense that he would wear wooden shoes, because wooden shoes, just if you're walking all the time, you're not going to want to wear wooden shoes, are you?
I don't know. I mean, that's an odd choice, but he must have thinking something.
Cork Birkenstocks.
Maybe they were hippie sandals.
Hippie sandals.
But no, but the whole clippity clap up the road. Here he comes, clippity clap. There's no one I'd oughter hang out with than Trotter.
He's doing like a Fred Astaire dance.
I know. It's like
a total tap dance. Keep him from your daughter. Watch out, here comes Trotter. Speaking of keep him from your daughter, he's an old man at this point.
Oh, Trotter or Aragorn?
Both of them.
Oh, yeah.
Being the same person.
Well, I mean, essentially. And
by looking at these old versions and then the final version, you see Tolkien kind of answering all his own question marks.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how many of those question marks he gets right. Like he takes away all the things that don't make sense, and he's left with the things that really kind of bolster this worldhood that he's building, because everything feels right. Do you think that's just because we're used to how it ended up being in the final product, or do you think it's it only feels familiar or right to us because this is how we know?
Because that's how I think it might. I mean, that probably is. I mean,
But when we come up like it's the whole Jar Jar Binks thing. Like I'm not a huge fan of that movie series, but like even I as
awesome.
Even I as not a fan of that movie series could tell you that, and I was probably not alone, that when you met Jar Jar Binks, you felt like, oh shoot, this doesn't feel right. Like I don't get that. Okay, so I don't get that feeling from when I was reading The Hobbit or when I was reading Lord of the Rings. I never or rarely got that feeling of like, this feels off.
Of course he would be there. There would be some kind of darkened character, but maybe like Tolkien over going into way more detail about this character in the corner. All of a sudden he's like, well, why am I doing that? Like subconsciously he's like, this needs to be, you know.
Yeah.
He was surprised that he came up, but it's something like in the back of his mind clicked that this, like whether or not he was a central character when he was writing him, he became a central character because something in the back of his head was like, you know, well, who is this chop in the corner?
Yeah, it must have been quite a neat ride to like be writing this for the first time and finding like, okay, suddenly this person appears. I have no idea who he is, and for many drafts, he's like kind of off the mark. Like, okay, this is a hobbit. Oh, it's not a hobbit. Oh, maybe it's a friend of Bilbo's going under an assumed name. Then it ends up being an elf or whatever.
Well, you know what though? Here's what it seems.
Go ahead.
No. Here's what it seems like to me. It seems like here's this character, right? And that like as he's writing or as he's like conceptualizing or whatever, coming up with like what this character does. He kept running into roadblocks. I got to imagine that, like, well, how would a hobbit, like, end up over, you know, like, I don't know, like,
right.
hunting down Gollum.
Right, because he already has, like, a history of so many things that, like, you know, he's already written about hobbits, so we're familiar with hobbits. So if he meets a person named Trotter in a bar, and there's something un-hobbit-like about him.
You know what? Okay, here's what it is. I would be willing to bet hobbits not really getting out of their little like shire. You know what I'm talking about? It's like how would he be a guide from here to Rivendell? You know what I'm talking about? How would a hobbit be able to know where everything is? Because you know,
and at first Tolkien, you get the sense that Tolkien's he introduces a character and then he tries to explain the character in terms of what's expected to be the case in the world that he's building. Right. So you're right, there wouldn't be a hobbit that could guide them to Rivendell. He tries to explain that by saying, oh, but what if there's this Peregrin Boffin guy who, under the influence of Bilbo and Bilbo's crazy stories, kind of disappeared at one point and went on these adventures and became an adventurer in his own right, and then he becomes a guide. So that's like, okay, that could be conceivable. But that quickly gets discarded because like he gets a better idea.
Yeah.
And let me just read this quickly this section about when he stumbles upon his better idea, and I think you'll see instantly that it works geographically and everything just falls into place once he comes up with his brilliant idea. It says, Tolkien appears to entertain the idea of Trotter not being a hobbit. This was not yet enough to change his mind about the Hobbit Ranger. After contemplating this difficult figure, Tolkien, after a break, came back with the explanation that Trotter was to be Peregrin Boffin, a favorite nephew of Bilbo, who, influenced by Gandalf or Bilbo's stories, had run away from the Shire years before. Okay. However, in the middle of making changes to make him fit within the narrative as Peregrin Boffin, Tolkien wrote, ? Trotter had better not be a hobbit, but a ranger, remainder of Western men.
Right.
So this is just an idea. He's trying to change him to fit from. He actually wants him to be an elf in disguise, and then a hobbit in disguise, and then suddenly he stops and he's like, no, he's a remainder of these Western men, which makes sense because there were these battles between the Witch King of Angmar, and there's this remnant of Western men left as rangers in that part of the world. Of course, you're going to run into one of them, and they'll be Isildur's heir, and it all makes sense. And it's like a perfect introduction to a character the fact that he's hiding in the wilderness now makes sense because he's hiding because he was Isildur's heir. He doesn't want to be killed like his dad was killed.
Right.
So yeah, everything once he discovers, like, wait a minute, this has to be Isildur's heir.
But you know what though, when you really think about it, but also like when you, on the grand, like a few questions, or not questions, but like if Trotter or Strider, whatever, like Trotter, let's say a hobbit, was around the Shire and ran away. Again, there might be a possibility with Frodo being 50 years old, right? Knowing that, oh, hey, Peregrin Boffin, fancy meeting you here. You know what I'm talking about?
Right,
particularly if he was a favorite nephew of Bilbo, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of dumb. But the idea that these two, like the fate of the ring is tied up with Aragorn's fate. You know what I'm saying? With Strider's fate. You know, like puts a way more of a weight on
exactly.
Like him like needing to have this the quest be like he knows what Frodo's carrying.
Yeah.
Like it is in his best interest to make sure that Frodo gets wherever
it gives it so much more weight and so much more. There's so much more at stake now.
Yeah.
By it being this person being who he is. And that's the thing about, you know, why I have been frustrated about like the Rings of Power series, because like
I'm gonna laugh every time you do that.
Because it introduces characters like, I mean, just a random, like the stone troll or whatever. Like you don't like the one they fight in the first episode.
Yeah.
Ice cave or whatever.
The ice troll, whatever. Yeah.
Right. Like they'll introduce a character that doesn't feel like it has any weight behind it. And granted, they do that occasionally in Lord of the Rings, but for the most part, everyone they meet has a history. Like even the Barrow-wight is a creature that has a history behind it.
Right.
It's not just some like random anonymous monster you meet in a Dungeons and Dragons lair. So everything feels weighted. Like even Shelob, when you meet Shelob, this is like a spawn of Ungoliant or something, you know, like that. Like everything has a history behind it. It gives it more weight and it makes it feel more real. So when Tolkien was like, okay, maybe this is a man of Westerness, one of the Dunedain.
Yeah.
Suddenly all the history of the Dunedain that he knew everything about, having written all the stuff about, you know, Numenor, and, you know, he'd been working on the Silmarillion and all that stuff for years. All that stuff can come in as a background for this new character that he's gotten. And suddenly that person, Aragorn or Strider's destiny and history meet at that moment in Bree with the ring bearer. And like, I don't know, it's just like you said, it gives it just so much more weight than it would have otherwise be if it was just some random guy from Bree. The
other thing too, where like Aragorn being like, you know, man, he can blend in. He can go and ride with the Rohirrim.
But I'm even thinking like folklore traditions or semi-historical or historical folklore traditions, such as like Daniel Boone was a big iconic figure in America. I always saw Strider as kind of a Daniel Boone figure, like a person who's like a long hunter who could disappear in the woods and be completely happy and completely like left to his own devices, survive just fine in the wilderness for years at a time.
But I don't think that it was by choice. It was by, I think he had to, you know, build himself up because, I mean.
Well, it was by choice in the sense that he was in hiding.
Yeah, he was in hiding, but he was also in training, though, too.
That's the thing. It's cool because it gives him his trajectory gives him an opportunity to hide and train at the same time. Like
unless he was some kind of like, you know, I don't want any responsibility.
But he's also almost like like a Ted Kaczynski. I guess what I'm saying is,
oh shit.
Well, I mean, just someone out in the wilderness. But
no, I know what you're saying.
But forget the Unabomber. The
Right.
fact that he's a forest person, a wood person, a person comfortable with the Ents, the trees.
Yeah.
Don't you think in Tolkienese or in Tolkien's world that made him one of the good guys? Pitted against like Saruman, who was like an industrialist.
No.
That's all I really meant when.
Oh, no, I know exactly what you meant.
Yeah.
Like, no.
I didn't know Unabomber was such a controversial figure. He's been in prison for many years.
I know, but like comparing like Aragorn to the Unabomber is like crazy. No, I do think though that this was kind of like, if I had to guess, this was like Tolkien's idealized alpha male.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Where he was like way more comfortable in nature, but he did use technology responsibly. You know what I'm talking about? I mean,
like Andrew.
Yeah. So he had the sword, so that was cool. But
well, the technology, the big supreme signifier of technology in this book is the ring. So does he take the ring? No, he doesn't.
No, that's what I'm saying.
If you met Strider and he's this guy sitting here in the corner,
right?
Would you believe him if he's like, I might look rather like a shady individual to you, but actually,
yeah, he does
I'm the
look
king
like
of the land.
No, but like I mean, look, if you look at this picture of Aragorn, like over there, like he looks like every illustration of the rogue in D&D.
Right,
you know what I'm talking about?
It almost in this picture, I know you can't really see it very well. It almost looks like he's wearing gray camo pants.
Yeah, a little bit, but that might be just like weather beaten pants or something like that.
Right, but it's like didn't I see you in a bar in Eugene, Oregon, or something, like with your gray camo pants?
Yeah, I know.
Or like people we used to see at Cafe Roma. Like trench coat people at Cafe Roma, like, I'm going to be a shady, roguish individual.
Oh, I'm going to sit in the corner looking mysterious, and hopefully all the girls will come over and talk to me.
Ask her to see my poetry journal.
Right. Oh, I'm going to get upstairs, get up on stage and recite some spoken word verses.
Do you know what it's like to be a man? A real man doesn't eat from a can. A real man has to go hunt with his hands. A real man.
Have you ever tried to kill a man with a broken hilt of a sword? I can. I'm that man.
I've got a broken sword, but that's not some kind of phallic reference.
Right.
My sword works just fine. Thank you very much.
All the ladies like my sword. I do.